David Cronenberg never made horror about monsters. He made it about us. His films turned science, sex, and technology into reflections of the body's darkest instincts. From parasites to psychic breakdowns, he built a world where evolution and infection are the same thing. These 10 films trace that journey, from the raw shock of Shivers and Rabid to the surreal decay of Videodrome, The Fly, and Dead Ringers. A timeline of obsession, transformation, and the strange beauty hiding in the flesh. Shivers, 1975. Cronenberg's first major feature, Shivers, feels like a virus that escaped from both a lab and the filmmaker's imagination. Set in a high-rise apartment complex, it follows the spread of a parasite that turns its victims into violent versions of themselves. What begins as a sterile medical experiment quickly devolves into a contained apocalypse, a world where infection and desire become the same thing. Shot in Montreal on a modest budget, Shivers introduced nearly all of Cronenberg's lifelong obsessions: transformation, the breakdown of the body, and the collision of science and instinct. The building itself becomes a living organism, its plumbing pulsing with infection, its residents shedding civilization one floor at a time. It's clinical and disgusting, intellectual and feral, often in the same frame. The film caused outrage on release, with critics calling it obscene, nihilistic, even dangerous, a warning about how easily technology, science, and human appetite can intertwine. Every scream and every slick crawling parasite paved the way for what would become Cronenberg's defining idea: that the horror of the future isn't something that attacks us from the outside. It grows from within. Shivers wasn't just the start of a career, it was the inflection point for an entire subgenre, the birth of body horror. Rabid, 1977. Rabid takes the ideas that Shivers introduced and pushes them into the streets. What was once contained within a high-rise has now spilled into the open, infecting the city itself. Marilyn Chambers stars as Rose, a young woman injured in a motorcycle accident who becomes the subject of an experimental surgical procedure. The operation saves her life, but leaves her with a new appetite for blood and a strange mutation growing beneath her arm. Cronenberg uses this setup to explore how infection spreads through a society desperate for control. The parasites in Shivers represented desire. Here, the disease becomes a metaphor for panic, for the collapse of trust in medicine and government. As Rose feeds, chaos blooms. The film moves like a contagion. Sterile clinics, suburban streets, and subway cars all blur together into one sick organism devouring itself. Chambers, known mostly for her work in adult films, gives the movie an eerie vulnerability. She's both victim and vector, unaware of the horror she's causing, which makes her story tragic instead of monstrous. Cronenberg's direction is colder here, more confident, trading shock for inevitability. Rabid feels like the moment his world fully formed, clean, modern, and quietly diseased. Released during the rise of viral paranoia and bioengineering fears, it caught something in the cultural bloodstream that never went away. Every later film, The Fly, Videodrome, even Crash, owes a piece of itself to the nightmare that began with Rose's new hunger. The Brood, 1979. If Shivers and Rabid were about infection, The Brood is about emotional contagion. Rage is a disease that can literally reproduce itself. It's Cronenberg's most personal horror film, written during his own divorce and custody battle, and it feels like it. On the surface, it's the story of a controversial psychiatrist who treats trauma through a technique called psychoplasmics, which allows patients to manifest their suppressed emotions physically. But when one of his patients, Nola Carveth, begins to externalize her rage, the results aren't symbolic. They're alive. Her emotions give birth to deformed, sexless children who act out her anger in the real world, attacking those who've wronged her. What should play as absurd instead becomes deeply disturbing. The Brood captures a new kind of horror. Domestic, psychological, but brutally physical. The clinical spaces, cold lighting, and emotional detachment make every outburst feel surgical. Samantha Eggar's performance as Nola is unforgettable, controlled one moment, unhinged the next, while Oliver Reed's calm manipulation is the madness in quiet authority. Cronenberg's fascination with body as mind takes full shape here. Every bruise, every wound, every mutation becomes a reflection of repressed feeling. The film's infamous final reveal remains one of the most shocking and symbolic moments in 1970s. Horror, grotesque, intimate, and tragic all at once. The Brood is pure Cronenberg. Intelligent, unsettling, and emotionally raw. It's the film where his themes stopped being theory and became flesh, marking the point where psychological horror turned literally inside out. Scanners, 1981. With Scanners, Cronenberg moved from intimate horror into the realm of science fiction, but the themes stayed the same. Control, mutation, and the danger of the human mind turned against itself. The film opens with one of the most unforgettable scenes in genre history, a corporate demonstration that ends with a man's head exploding, and somehow only gets stranger from there. The story follows a group of scanners, people born with powerful telepathic and telekinetic abilities after their mothers were exposed to a questionable pharmaceutical drug. At the center is Cameron Vale, a lost soul recruited by a shadowy corporation to hunt down a rogue scanner named Daryl Revok, played with volcanic menace by Michael Ironside. What unfolds feels like a Cold War thriller rewritten as a nightmare about human evolution, the next step in mankind's development gone horribly wrong. Cronenberg's clinical precision gives the film its unique pulse. The sterile labs and corporate offices feel interchangeable, like organs inside one vast, decaying body. The special effects, practical, messy, and tactile, remain some of the most iconic in horror history. Beneath the spectacle lies a deeply Cronenbergian idea. That thought itself can become a weapon. That intellect without empathy leads to annihilation. Scanners became Cronenberg's breakout hit. And for good reason. It's both cerebral and grotesque, the perfect fusion of sci-fi concept and body horror execution. The film's explosive imagery may have made it famous, but its true power lies in its vision of a world where the mind is no longer private, where the ultimate invasion comes from inside your own head. Videodrome, 1983. Few films define David Cronenberg's vision as perfectly as Videodrome. It's the point where his ideas about technology, flesh, and control fuse into a single, disturbing masterpiece. The film follows Max Wren, the sleazy head of a low-rent cable station searching for the next shocking thing to put on television. When he discovers a pirate broadcast called Videodrome, a program that appears to show real torture and murder, he becomes obsessed. But as he digs deeper, he realizes the show isn't just something to watch. It's something that watches back. What follows is both a descent into madness and a manifesto. The signal infects Max's body, rewriting his perception of reality, and transforming him into something new. Part man, part media, wounds become cassette slots, guns merge with flesh, the television becomes an altar. Cronenberg's vision is grotesque, seductive, and disturbingly prophetic, a world where technology doesn't just entertain us, it reprograms us. James Woods delivers one of his best performances, perfectly embodying Cronenberg's cynical anti-hero. Curious, self-destructive, and ultimately consumed by his own fascination. Deborah Harry adds another layer of danger as Nikki Brand, whose attraction to pain and transformation mirrors Max's unraveling psyche. Released in the same year as The Dead Zone, Videodrome marked the peak of Cronenberg's early style, intimate yet visionary, shocking yet philosophical. Long before the internet, social media, or VR, Cronenberg predicted a world where the body and the broadcast would merge into one. Long live the new flesh wasn't just a line of dialogue, it was a declaration of where horror was headed. The Dead Zone, 1983. Adapted from Stephen King's novel The Dead Zone, showed a different side of David Cronenberg, one that could explore empathy and tragedy without losing his fascination with the human mind under strain. Christopher Walken stars as Johnny Smith, a small-town schoolteacher who wakes from a 5-year coma with psychic abilities that allow him to see a person's future through touch. What begins as a gift quickly becomes a curse. as Johnny realizes he can prevent terrible things from happening, but only through acts that destroy his own life. Unlike the bodily mutations of Videodrome or The Brood, the transformation here is internal, psychological. Cronenberg strips away the surrealism and replaces it with cold emotional clarity. The wintry landscapes of rural Maine mirror Johnny's isolation, and Walken's fragile, haunted performance gives the story its aching center. This is horror without monsters. Only fate, consequence, and unbearable moral weight. The film's slow pacing and restrained direction give its final act devastating power. Johnny's confrontation with Martin Sheen's apocalyptic politician feels prophetic, capturing both the paranoia and cynicism that would define late 20th century politics. Yet even amid the bleakness, The Dead Zone is one of Cronenberg's most human works, a meditation on sacrifice, purpose, and the limits of power. Released the same year as Videodrome, it proved that Cronenberg could do more than shock. He could devastate. The Dead Zone is about the horror of knowing too much, of seeing the future and realizing there's no way to escape it. The Fly, 1986. The Fly isn't just Cronenberg's most famous film. It's one of the greatest examples of how horror can be both grotesque and deeply human. A remake in name only, it reimagines the 1958 classic as a tragic love story wrapped in mutation and decay. Jeff Goldblum stars as Seth Brundle, an eccentric scientist whose teleportation experiment goes horribly wrong after a housefly slips into the machine with him. The fusion transforms him cell by cell as his genius and arrogance dissolve into something primal and monstrous. Cronenberg approaches the transformation with both fascination and pity. The makeup effects, created by Chris Wallace, remain among the most convincing and stomach-turning in film history. But the real horror isn't the slime or deformity, it's Brundle's awareness of what's happening to him. His slow loss of humanity, physically and mentally, becomes a metaphor for disease, obsession, and the erosion of identity. Goldblum's performance is heartbreaking, playful, brilliant, then desperate, while Geena Davis grounds the film with warmth and vulnerability, making the tragedy feel painfully real. Their relationship gives the story emotional weight, turning what could have been just another effects showcase into a modern monster classic. What began as pulp becomes poetry. The Fly is about the terror of change, of the body, of love, of mortality. It's the ultimate expression of Cronenberg's belief that transformation is inevitable, and that all flesh, no matter how beautiful or intelligent, eventually breaks down. Be afraid, Brundle says. Be very afraid. He's not just talking about science, and he's talking about being alive. Dead Ringers, 1988. With Dead Ringers, Cronenberg traded parasites and mutations for something far more intimate, psychological decay that feels just as invasive. Jeremy Irons delivers a career-defining dual performance as twin gynecologists Beverly and Elliot Mantle, brilliant doctors who share everything: their practice, their research, and even their lovers. When one of those relationships begins to divide them, the twins' perfect symmetry starts to crumble, and their obsession with control turns inward. Cronenberg treats their descent not as spectacle, but as tragedy. The surgical tools gleam like instruments of ritual, and the cold clinical setting feels detached from the real world, a sterile cathedral where flesh and identity lose meaning. The body horror here isn't about transformation, it's about dependency. The Mantles can't exist apart, and as their lives unravel, their shared madness becomes its own grotesque biology. Irons' dual performance is haunting. Subtle, precise, and disturbingly believable. You forget you're watching one actor because he makes both brothers feel whole, yet fractured. Genevieve Bujold adds another layer of sadness as the actress who becomes both muse and mirror, the catalyst for their downfall. Released at the tail end of the 80s, Dead Ringers feels like the culmination of everything Cronenberg had been exploring for over a decade: identity, obsession, and the thin tissue separating mind from body. It's elegant, clinical, and devastating. By stripping away the overt horror, he revealed something far scarier: that self-destruction doesn't always come from mutation or infection. Sometimes it's born from the need to feel whole. eXistenZ, 1999. By the time eXistenZ arrived, Cronenberg had already dissected the human body from every angle. So he turned his scalpel toward reality itself. The film follows Allegra Geller, a game designer played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, whose latest creation blurs the line between the virtual and the physical. Players plug into her organic game pods through bioports in their spines, entering a simulation so immersive that no one can tell what's real anymore. When an assassination attempt forces her to go on the run with a nervous marketing trainee, Jude Law, the two fall deeper into a maze of flesh, fantasy, and paranoia. Cronenberg approaches eXistenZ like a twisted cousin to Videodrome, another story about technology rewriting biology. But here the metaphor is even slipperier. The game world looks no different from reality, and every time you think you've found solid ground, it dissolves. The film's living technology, pulsating weapons, breathing consoles, umbilical cords that double as data cables, turns the digital revolution into something tactile and obscene. Leigh and Law's detached, dreamlike performances add to the film's eerie disconnection, while Cronenberg's dry humor seeps through every grotesque detail. The story folds in on itself like a recursive nightmare, until the only question left is whether there's ever been a real world at all. Released at the tail end of the 90s, eXistenZ was overshadowed by The Matrix, but in many ways, it's the more disturbing prophecy. Cronenberg didn't imagine technology freeing humanity. He imagined it digesting us. Spider, 2002. After decades of exploring the horror of flesh and transformation, Cronenberg turned inward with Spider, a quiet, devastating study of memory and mental illness. Ralph Fiennes stars as Dennis Clegg, known only as Spider, a man recently released from a psychiatric institution who drifts through a grim, fog-covered London trying to piece together fragments of his childhood. What he finds isn't clarity, but a maze of half-remembered trauma, guilt, and hallucination. Cronenberg trades body horror for psychological decay, but the tone remains unmistakably his. The cluttered boarding house, the muted color palette, the eerie sense of detachment, it all feels like the inside of someone's mind turned inside out. There are no monsters or mutations here, only the breakdown of perception itself. As Spider revisits his past, reality slips further away, memories folding and contradicting until the truth feels irrelevant. Fiennes gives a haunting performance, nearly wordless yet full of nervous energy, his every gesture suggesting a man held together by threads. Miranda Richardson is mesmerizing in multiple roles, mother, lover, and phantom, embodying how memory distorts the people we've lost. Spider may seem subdued compared to Cronenberg's earlier work, but it's the natural endpoint of everything he'd been exploring for decades. The flesh is still unstable, only now it's the mind that mutates. It's a film about the horror of recollection, of being trapped in a body that remembers too much, and a brain that can no longer trust itself. Cronenberg's horror was never about survival. It was about acceptance. The idea that the body changes, the mind fractures, and that's what makes us human. His films stare directly into that truth, unflinching and fascinated. If you love strange cinema, forgotten horror, and directors who cut deeper than the surface, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us which Cronenberg film still crawls under your skin. Thanks for watching. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.